In this video, I'm going to take you through all of the playable cards for Commander from Bloomburrow and Bloomburrow Commander, which is the newest Magic set that is releasing on August 2nd. My name is Nathan, this is the Salty Productions YouTube channel. I've made videos for all of the other colors, and you can check those out in the description below for all of the playable cards from each color from Bloomburrow. But before we get into the discussion for red and then colorless and then lands, I'd just like to ask if you like this kind of content, leave a like on the video and subscribe. I always appreciate it, and it helps me out tremendously. And starting us off, we have Coruscation Mage, 2-mana 2/2 Otter Wizard with Offspring 2, meaning we can pay 2 colorless to create a copy of this. That's a 1/1. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. Now, we've seen other effects like this before in Spellslinger decks. Gutter Snipe and Electrostatic Field specifically care about instants and sorceries. With Coruscation Mage, I do like that it is non-creature, so you can play this with artifacts if you are an artifact spammy type of deck, and it is modal, so if you have the 4 mana, you can create the copy for extra damage. And of course, this is great in any sort of damage doubler or big damage type of deck. So Solfim, Gearsenstarn, etc. Will absolutely love this card. Gearsenstarn in particular can double that damage to 2 because it is dealing exactly 1 damage. And then with the Offspring copy, it also triggers Gearsenstarn. So very nice there. And it's nice to have yet another effect like this that is playable with the Spellslinger type of decks. Next, we have Dragonhawk, Fate's Tempest, 5-mana 5/5 bird dragon with flying. When it enters or attacks, exile the top cards of your library, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater. You may play those cards until your next end step. At the beginning of your next end step, Dragonhawk deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards that are still exiled. So it gives you the option to play those if you need the card advantage or to deal some damage. Now, I was looking for comparables for effects like this, and I really only came up with Tectonic Giant. I think that there's not a lot of effects like this attached to a creature body, and this is just very much better than Tectonic Giant, given that it only Tectonic Giant only allows you to choose one of those modes, whereas this gives you essentially both, that you can then choose which mode you want. So I think that this is a medium source of card advantage. Obviously, it will trigger on itself, so X will always be at least 1. You have to ask yourself, will you be able to trigger it for X's 2 or more within your deck? So I think that if you are running like an Dragon deck, dragons might want this because you consistently get that X value up. Solfim also might want this as a damage doubler and just potential source of card advantage. So it's kind of, your mileage may vary depending on if you can trigger that X ability, I believe. So at minimum, we can count on this dealing 2 damage if we choose not to cast the card. But I just think that Impulse Drawing for 1 off of a 5-drop is just not particularly good. I mean, it does have the ETB, so you get value right away, but I think you really need to pump up that X for this to be playable in 2024 Commander. But also, it is Dragon, so it fits in your Miram type of decks and those type of decks that want to be copying dragons for the ETB effects as well. Next, we have Hearthborn Battler, 3-mana 2/3 Lizard Warlock. It has haste. Whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Hearthborn Battler deals 2 damage to target opponent. I'm a little bit disappointed that this only targets an opponent instead of dealing to each opponent. I think it would be a lot more playable if it was, but I think this is still a good option if you are playing any sort of deck that has red prison effects. So we've seen effects like this with like Cemetery Gatekeeper, which specifically cares about playing cards of a specific type to deal damage. Eidolon of the Great Revel, which I believe saw some play in Modern, which cares about CMC 3 or less. So Hearthborn Battler fits fits among these options, and I think these effects silently just deal a lot of damage. They really go under the radar because it is really only 2 damage. Although I will say it is kind of annoying to just be like, oh, you take 2, you cast your second spell, oh, you take 2, you know, so like it can make you more evident to the table, but in terms of the actual number of damage it deals, like nobody I think would spend the removal spell on this just because it's only dealing 2 damage and only on their second spell. I don't know. In Commander, I don't know if it pulls enough weight to really be worth it with 40 life, but I think that if you get this to stick by turn 3, this will probably silently deal about 20 to 30 damage around the table, assuming that it can stick around. So there are some options there, and it just becomes another prison piece for when you are trying to essentially set up your moat around the opponents in these red prison style of decks. So interesting pick here, and I think that this would again fit in those prison style of decks, Rook Thar being one of them, or if you want to double that damage, it fits into like a Torbran, which is also kind of a placeholder for any of the damage doubling type of commanders, such as Oaher Axonil and Sulfim as well. Next, we have Might of the Meek, 1-mana instant, target creature gains trample until end of turn. It also gets +1/+0 until end of turn if you control a mouse. Who cares about that? We care about trample and the fact that it draws a card tacked on at the end. So this is just another great spell if you're in a Spellslinger deck trying to cantrip out as many effects as possible. We've seen effects like this before with Crash Through and Ancestral Anger, both of which are very playable in, for example, Veyran type of decks. Stellarly is also an option here for Spellslinger, but really I was thinking of Veyran when I included this in the video notes. I think that Might of the Meek just allows you to swing in with Veyram with evasion. It replaces itself. It's pretty much everything that you want in a cantrip for a Veyran deck. Next, we have Season of the Bold, the red version of the season cycle. 5-mana sorcery, choose up to 5 widgets worth of modes. You may choose the same mode more than once. We can pay 1, create a tap treasure, pay 2, exile the top 2 cards until the end of your next turn. You may play them, so a nice little delayed impulse there. Or we can pay 3 until the end of your next turn whenever you cast a spell, which is pretty sweet. It doesn't limit you to instants or sorceries. Season of the Bold deals 2 damage to up to 1 target creature. Unfortunately, it does not player. So it is essentially, I think the third mode is the weakest out of the bunch. We've seen effects like this with Inspired Tinkering, where you're just making mana and drawing cards. In red, in mono red at least, the best you can hope for is that delayed impulse draw effect, where we can exile until the end of our next turn. So if this is a 5-mana, essentially draw 4 and create a tap treasure. So then if you've kind of figured that next turn you'll create the treasure, it's really a 4-mana draw 4, which I think is super good in Commander, even in 2024. And I think this is going to be a slam dunk in most red decks. If you care about treasures, or if you care about any sort of cast from exile effects, I mean, this was minted for Prosper. I know a lot of people say in every set review, oh, you know, this goes into Prosper, but this card was like specifically printed for Prosper. I'm absolutely confident. And I included Faldorn here as just another commander that cares about casting things from exile. But of course, if you care about artifacts entering, it triggers that. It triggers your card advantage. And so Season of the Bold is just going to be powering a lot of red decks in the near future. Next, we have Sunspine Lynx, 4-mana 5/4 elemental cat. Players can't gain life. Damage can't be prevented. When it enters, it deals damage to each player equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls, with the obvious comparison being Price of Progress, which, oh my gosh, it shows how busted Price of Progress actually is, because Price of Progress is only 2 mana, and it deals damage equal to each player equal to twice the number of non-basic lands that player controls instead of only 1. So Sunspine Lynx is absolutely abusable here. I think they even toned it down instead of dealing the twice, just because they planned on people breaking this with flicker style effects, because you can certainly flicker it and it is not limited to once per turn. So if you are running a blink deck, something like a Pantlaza Sunfavored, which is sort of a stand-in here for blink commanders that run red, you can certainly be abusing this quite a bit. And just the amount of non-basic lands people run nowadays is just pretty ridiculous. I mean, basics are at their all-time lowest on the Stonks chart, I think. So this is going to just be KOing people left and right. And the other part of this is that it shuts off life gain, which is crucial for burn decks. So like, if this is not only is the burn burn excellent on its own, but you can't prevent the damage, and you shut off all life gain effects, with which some burn decks really care about. Actually, I would say most burn decks really care about. And of course, if you can double it, you know, again, Solfim in here as a stand-in for Torbran, or Solfim to just double that damage, it is absolutely crazy, and I think Solfim decks are eating really well with this set. Next, we have some honorable mentions for red. Those are all of the playable cards, and so I just wanted to mention some cards that are a little bit more niche, or perhaps might be on the fringe of getting cut. Festival of Embers, 5-mana enchantment. During your turn, you may cast instant and sorcery cards from your graveyard by paying 1 life in addition to their other costs. If a card or token will be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So a nice little safety valve there. And we could pay 2 to sacrifice the festival if we want to not be exiling our things as we cast them. So this is the fixed version of Underworld Breach. Of course, at 5 mana, it sticks around instead of being sacrificed at the next end step like Underworld Breaches. And I think that this is an option for card advantage for Spellslinger style of decks, because it's just a 5 mana. Essentially, you may now cast everything in your graveyard. The 1 life probably doesn't matter too much, so it is a great source of card advantage, but I think you have to be specifically in cheap Spellslinger style of decks, such as Veyran or any sort of the low to the ground cantrippy type of commanders. Prosperous Bandit, 3 mana, 2/2 Raccoon Rogue with Offspring 1, so we can pay 1 and create a 1/1 token copy of this card. First strike, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, create that many tapped treasure tokens. So I think I was looking for comparables for this card, and I was kind of coming up short. I think that there is a lot of potential in this card if you can be pumping it, and I guess specifically I was looking at Jetmir decks potentially. Like, granted, if you have Jetmir on the field and you have all of the modes checked, like, you are probably winning the game at that point, because if opponents let Jetmir stick around for even 1 turn, essentially you're dead when you have 10 creatures on board. But I think that if you give it evasion somehow, any sort of commander that gives your creatures evasion, or if you're already running a lot of effects that give flying or any sort of trample effects, I think that Prosperous Bandit is an option. It definitely is sort of in the runner-up category here, just because you have to put a little bit of extra work into it to get value out of it. It's really a 3 mana do nothing the turn it comes down, so it gets point taken off for that. But if you care about raccoons or rogues, it's definitely an option there. It creates treasures. If you care about artifacts, it might be an option there, but again, it's pretty slow. I feel like typically treasure decks want treasures immediately so that they can essentially be comboing off, you know, with all of their burn finishers and so forth. So Prosperous Bandit, interesting card. I don't know if it would make the cut, but if you can give it evasion, maybe take a look at it. Next, we have Hoarder's Overflow, 2-mana enchantment. When it enters and whenever you expend 4, which means you spend your 4th mana during a turn, put a stash counter on it, and we can pay 2 and sack it to discard your hand and draw cards equal to the number of stash counters on Hoarder's Overflow. So I think that this is a great new source of red card draw. I think that you really want to be running Proliferate in your deck for this to be worth it. So if you're running any sort of counter deck with red in it already that might not be running blue, such as Shalai and Halar, for example, this is a great option. I think that if you play this on 2, and then you wouldn't trigger it on 3, presumably, because you only have 3 mana at that point. So by turn 4, by turn 5, by turn 6, you probably want to be cracking it. So you could probably get up to, I think the Magical Christmas Land is you get up to essentially 4 counters, and then you pay 2, and for that you paid 4 mana to discard your hand and then draw cards. So I mean, I guess if you want to be discarding your hand, it has extra synergy there. I just think it takes a little bit more work to get up to get those stash counters up, and if you can proliferate them, then I think this is definitely worth looking at for your deck. But it takes more work to get that card advantage piece, which is why it is in the runner-up category here. Stormsplitter is a 4 mana otter wizard, 1/4 with haste. haste. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, create a token that's a copy of it. Exile that token at the beginning of the next end step. I was trying to look for combos with this card. Also, its scepter is hilarious, being a metal or perhaps a dead fish there. I don't know. I just noticed that. That was hilarious. But this, I was thinking, like, would go in Zada, question mark, because you can create more instants and sorceries. There's got to be a way to go infinite with this. There just has to be. I didn't find any readily available online, so let me know if you have found a way to break this card in the comments down below. Then we have Rockface Village. If you are in a lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon deck, such as Mabel Heir to Cragflame, which also is red and white, you might want this card because you can give one of those card types, or tribal types, I suppose you could say, +1/+0 and haste until end of turn for 1 red mana. So that is pretty decent, but only if you are in those tribal decks. And I believe that brings us to the end of the review, so let's cover the top 3 red cards from Bloomburrow and Bloomburrow Commander. Drum roll, please, everybody. We have Season of the Bold, Sunspine Lynx, and Coruscation Mage. So Season of the Bold, I think, really just goes into any red deck. Red decks are always hurting for better and more card draw, and so this definitely fits in as essentially a 4-mana draw 4 by creating that tapped treasure token and then paying 4 widgets into the second mode. And in addition, Sunspine Lynx, I think you're just going to see this in burn decks everywhere. I mean, if you're in a mono red deck, you're probably in some variation of burn or some sort of prison style of deck that cares about doing damage. And so this is just going to be abused probably quite a bit by being flickered or reanimated or brought back in any way. And then Coruscation Mage, again, I think you're just going to see this in a lot of Spellslinger type of decks. Anything that's going to be casting a lot of non-creature spells that cares about doubling up on their burn. All right, let's cover some colorless cards then, just because I felt that there were not enough red cards for a video on its own, and so I wanted to kind of combine colorless cards in here to fill it out a little bit. We have Patchwork Banner, 3-mana artifact. When it enters, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1, and you can tap to add 1 mana of any color. Also, I absolutely love this art. It is just, it feels so homely. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it just feels so like warm and inviting. And the obvious comparison here is Heraldic Banner. So I think this is just essentially a straight upgrade of Heraldic Banner. In most tribal decks, you're going to be replacing this. I think I only run Heraldic Banner in like 1 deck, I want to say, which might be my Edgar deck now that I think about it, but I can't quite remember. But anyway, yeah, just pretty much a straight upgrade. I think in certain situations, you might just want to run both. I mean, I know it's blasphemy in 2024 Commander to be playing 3-mana mana rocks, but I think that the Lord effect, if you consider that as being worth 1 mana all on its own, makes Patchwork Banner valued at around 2 mana for the mana adding effect. And so I think that a 3-mana mana rock in this particular instant is perfectly playable. Then we move on to the lands. So of course 3 Tree City is the poster boy, most powerful land out of the set, being the Nykthos for tribals, because we can pay 2, tap to choose a color, add an amount of mana of that color equal to the number of creatures you control of the chosen type. And it is generally harder to generate creatures on board versus pips like Nykthos cares about, but 3 Tree City goes into multicolored decks, and I think that this might be the exception for not including color producing lands, so like your dual lands and so forth, to make sure that you're hitting your pips. I think that this definitely will take that colorless land slot just because it has the potential to produce a ton of mana, and this will definitely be the chase card out of Bloomburrow. Hidden Grotto, when it enters, surveil 1, and you can tap to add a colorless, or you can filter colors with it. And of course, this is similar to all of the other surveil lands we've already seen. It is our like 5th or 6th, I think. So Gallifrey Council Chamber here serving as the stand-in for all of those options. We just got one from Thunder Junction 2. I forget. I think it might be, yeah, I forget what the name of it is, but I will have it up in post that way. So Hidden Grotto, perfectly playable if you're in a self-mill deck. Then we have Fountainport, enters untapped. We can pay colorless, or we can pay 2, tap it to sack a token to draw a card. We can pay 3, tap it, pay 1 life to create a 1/1 token, or we can pay 4 and tap it to create a treasure token. I don't think we would ever use the mode where we pay 4 to create a treasure token. If you are paying effectively 5 mana to make a treasure token, you are going to lose. I don't think you would ever want to activate that ability. I also don't think you would pretty much ever want to create a 1/1 fish creature token unless you were literally top decking in a token deck. Rather, what you run this land for is the second mode to sack a token and draw a card for 2 mana. So the obvious comparison here is War Room, where of course you can pay 3, tap it, pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity to draw a card. I think that Fountainport can probably fit into 2-colored token decks that have a lot of just low to the ground tokens ready to be sacked, or if you want tokens to be sacked for aristocrats style of payoffs, then that is certainly an option for you. But again, you're competing nowadays with limited colorless slots given the prevalence of just very powerful utility lands, MDFCs and so forth. So I think this would probably make the cut in like a 2-color token deck. I don't know if I would necessarily put it into Jetmir. For example, I'm always weary about producing colors, but that's just my personal play style. I personally find it incredibly frustrating when you have the mana available to cast things, but you don't have the correct colors. That to me is more frustrating than being mana screwed, because it's like, okay, well, the irony is that I have the mana, but I still can't cast things, and so it's more frustrating than just not even drawing lands, in my personal opinion. So I lean towards a more color fixing style of lands in my decks. And with that, I think that brings us to the end of our red and colorless set review for Bloomburrow. Hopefully you guys found a couple of cards that you'll be slotting into your decks. I had a ton of fun making this video, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it and subscribe. I'll be making the last video green here coming up in the next day or two, so stay tuned for that. So with that, I'll wrap up the video, guys. Thank you all for watching once again, and hopefully we'll see you all in the green video.